Thank you very much, and I would like to wholeheartedly thank your committee for the initiative to invite me. My name is Zoe Konstantopoulou. I'm a lawyer. I am currently the president of Course to Freedom, which is a political party aiming at the liberation of Greece, the liberation of my country, from the memoranda regime and the debt imposition. And I served as president of the parliament in Greece from February to September 2015. In that capacity, as president of the Hellenic Parliament, I took the initiative to form the Truth Committee on Public Debt. This was an international committee of experts, academics, jurists, activists from all around the world. We were very, very honored to have among its members Maria Lucia Fattorelli, who gave a very, very intrinsic view in the works and the findings of the committee. And this was the first and only, up to now, institutional committee ever founded in the European Union to perform an audit and a legal assessment of public debt. Up to now, it still is the only institutional debt audit and legal assessment committee ever founded in the European Union. It was called a Truth Committee in order to emphasize on two important aspects. One, the fundamental right of the people to know the truth about how debt imposed upon them was created and inflated. Two, the criminal nature of illegal debt imposition upon a population, leading to its destruction. I believe the works and findings of this committee are an international acquis, and I'm happy to share with you this experience as I was asked to. I also believe that had the Greek population known the details of what really happened in Latin America and in Brazil during the 80s with the involvement of the IMF and the World Bank, a lot of the suffering and destruction inflicted upon my people would have been avoided. Today, we're given a reverse chance. The chance to let you know of the horrendous experiences of Greece during the last 6.5 years, the period through which the country has been subjected to the memoranda regime. I know many of you may not be familiar with what has been happening in Greece, and this is why I deem it necessary to summarize the situation for you. Because from what I understand, what has been happening to Greece is about to be imported in a different context here in Brazil. It's being already disseminated around Europe with the participation of the IMF. And it is very important to share knowledge and experience in order to avoid the worst. The worst not just being misery, the worst being the total violation of democracy and the suppression of freedom. Let me then tell you what things have been like in Greece ever since 2010. In 2010, the Greek people were suddenly told that their country was over-indebted and in the verge of bankruptcy, that they needed to make extreme sacrifices for Greece to be saved. At the same time, the people, Greeks, were depicted in the international media as lazy, corrupt, and living beyond their means. And then they were told that the recipe for salvation was to enter into loan agreements with European Union institutions and the IMF, namely the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the IMF, and the newly created, at the time, European Financial Stability Facility, who would become Greece's creditors to supposedly help Greece repay its debt. The loan agreements were linked to memoranda of understanding, dictating policies and measures to be adopted by government and voted by parliament in order for disbursements of the loans to be effectuated. Each disbursement was linked to extraordinary and extortionate procedures at parliament. It was extra urgent procedures asking members of parliament to either vote whatever was dictated by the creditors or let the country suffocate. A complex set of newly founded tools and mechanisms, including the EFSF, the European Financial Stability Facility, the HFSF, the Hellenic Financial Stability Fund, the Public Property Privatization Fund, all under the legal form of Société Anonyme, were created, and an unofficial body of non-elected employees of the three creditors, namely the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, became the supervisors of the country, the supervisors of Greece, the so-called Troika. Measures such as extreme taxation, cuts in salaries and pensions, public spending cuts in education, health, social security, resulted to what really amounted to a humanitarian crisis. Unemployment in the country rose to 30% among the general population, reaching 60% among young men and 72% among young women. We're talking about 1.5 million unemployed on an active population of 3.5 million. 300,000 young scientists were forced to emigrate out of lack of jobs in the country. 1 out of 2 children were reported living, and are still reported, living below the poverty line. 1 out of 2 pensioners are reported living below the poverty line. 300,000 small and medium enterprises were shut down by 2012-2013, and 300,000 families were reported living without electricity for months or even years by that time. We have had people dying trying to heat themselves with self-made heating machines, and we have had an explosion of suicides out of despair. And during that same time, the debt for the sake of which all those measures were fabricated and taken and dictated, instead of decreasing, increased. But in 2009, the public debt was less than 120% of the GDP. By 2015, it had reached 180% of the GDP. But what was the most grave of all is that this debt which was being used as the pretext and the tool for the population's subordination to extreme measures, had never been investigated. It had never been audited and analyzed. This is where the works of the Debt Truth Committee come, the Truth Committee on Public Debt, founded on the 4th of April of 2015 as a parliamentary committee under the auspices of the Hellenic Parliament, having the specific mandate to audit and legally investigate the public debt. And let me say that this committee is a main reason why now no one can argue that Greece's debt should be repaid. This committee is also the main reason for major imposition and major extortions directed against Greece and against the Greek population by the creditors in the summer of 2015. This committee is one of the reasons the Parliament was dissolved in August-September 2015, because unlike the people and unlike those who serve justice, democracy, and freedom, there are those who do not want the people to know the truth. There are those who do not want for the truth to be known. There are those who prefer to present subordination instruments, to present enslavement tools such as the debt repayment mechanisms as purported mechanisms to alleviate an economic crisis. The main lesson learned from Greece and in Greece, the main lesson learned through the examination of the Greek debt, the main lesson which I believe is important for you to consider is that what is very often presented as economic or financial procedures, what is very often presented as technical and technocratic, is not just that. Rather, it is a veil, it is a shield, it is a pretext to allow for political imposition and a totalitarian regime to be installed in countries where democracy should reign. What were the lessons learned from the operation of the Debt Truth Committee? First lesson: Greece's debt had been the result of illegal and unconstitutional practices by both the Greek governments and the international creditors. It was created in violation of international law, including in violation of the International Monetary Fund statute. It was not the result of public spending for the people and in the public interest. Public spending in Greece, despite what the main propaganda had been saying, was under the European average in all public sector fields except for defense. Defense, however, is the sector in which tens of major corruption cases have been revealed, corruption cases involving both government officials, Greek government officials, and international defense firms involving major European and other governments, namely Germany, France, the United States, etc. The lessons learned and the reports issued by the Debt Truth Committee in June 2015 and in September 2015 showed that what was being given to Greece as loans, what was being directed supposedly to Greece as money to aid its economy, as money to bail out Greece, as it was said, was never directed to the Greek budget. Rather, 92% of this money was redirected to the creditors, and to be very, very accurate, I should underline that it is not even proven that all this money, 92% of the loans, ever even passed from the Greek bank accounts. It was further shown that repayment of Greece's debt meant a violation of the democratic rules and fundamental human rights, international, constitutional, national. It was substantiated that Greece's debt could not be repaid without undermining the well-being of the whole population. And it was shown that Greece's debt is indeed illegal, illegitimate, odious, and unsustainable. What is of extreme importance to know? What is of extreme importance for you to know in the context of your discussion for the bill that you are examining is that what was designed and effectuated for Greece as a so-called bailout plan was a criminal act, and that international players, international institutions such as the IMF had knowledge of the criminal effects of the measures that it designed and it imposed. There are confidential documents of the IMF which are committee revealed, examined and revealed, which showed that there was knowledge with the IMF officials ever since 2010, ever since the beginning, that the measures dictated and the loans given supposedly to alleviate Greece's debt would lead to long-term recession, to instability, and to a rupture of the social tissue. And this is on the record. It was shown that it was known ever since 2010 that the solution was not to burden the country with more debt through more loans. No, the solution was for the debt to be stricken down. But at that point, to strike down public debt would have meant major losses for private sector players, and specifically for private banks in Germany and in France, who were holding Greek bonds at a level of tens of billions. It was therefore decided to save German and French banks rather than save Greece and the Greek population. And it was further decided to burden the country with loans in order to alleviate, on the first period, German and French banks who got rid of the bonds that they were holding, and in the second period, Greek banks which were given tens of billions in euros in order to save themselves, while the Greek society was actually being killed. It was actually being murdered by those measures. What has been proven at this point is that those elaborate mechanisms created, those technical procedures installed, and I will concentrate on the EFSF. These were just tools to subordinate the country. These were just tools to facilitate private sector gains. These were just tools to defraud the society and to damage the public interest. The EFSF was an ad hoc, never seen before construction, which was created in May 2010 as a Société Anonyme based in Luxembourg. It was characterized as a special purpose vehicle. It was composed by 17 European countries, European states, as its associates. It was vested with an objective to issue financial instruments without itself being a financial institution. The state members were guarantors to these financial instruments, and it was closely linked to the IMF prerequisites. Basically, it was an IMF demand in order for the loan agreements and the memoranda to be signed, and for this debt imposition construction to be installed in Greece. I understand that what you're examining as a new bill is an analogous construction. And in examining its technical parameters, I couldn't say advice, but my experience, which I would like to share with you, is never ever to neglect the political repercussions. Never ever to neglect whether this kind of procedure actually removes democratic sovereignty from the states and from the regions, and whether this procedure actually removes democratic rights from the people. What has been happening to my country amounts not only to an international crime, a crime against humanity, but also to a coup against democracy. No kind of financial consideration and no kind of financial construction can justify the violation of democracy. No kind of economic consideration can justify the violation of human freedom and human dignity. I hope that the example of Greece serves as an example for you to consider, for you to resist, for you to refute IMF and economic imposition, for you to claim what I believe your oath contains, to serve democracy and popular sovereignty. Thank you very much.